All right, we are live, Chair. Ready when you are.
Thank you very much. All right, welcome everybody, and welcome to everybody that's joining us through our YouTube channel as well. We'll call to order the November 1st, 2024 meeting of the Nevada Sentencing Commission. This is our 11th meeting of our cycle, and I'll ask Director Powers to take roll at this point, if you would, please, Georgia.
Thank you, Chair. John Arascotta. Michelle Bays. Shara Bradley.
Present.
Suzanne Crawford.
Present.
Chris DeRucco.
Here.
James Zarenda.
Here.
Aaron Evans.
Present.
Evelyn Grosnick.
Present.
Christopher Hicks.
I see Chris. I don't know if he's muted.
Yeah, I thought I saw him.
There you
Oh,
go.
there he is. Okay. We'll mark him present. Mark Jackson.
Here.
Troy Jordan.
Here.
Franklin Katchke. Dr. Lanterman.
Present.
Captain Martinez.
Here.
John McCormick. Chair, he said he would be here following another meeting at 9:30.
Okay, thank you.
Julia Murray. I saw her earlier. Oh, there you go. Gotcha. Okay. We're marking her present. John Ponder. Erica Susie Yamas. Judge Yeager.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblyman Hibbets.
Here.
Senator Scheibel.
Here.
Senator Krasner.
Here.
Vice Chair Brady.
Present.
Chair Herndon.
Present.
Chair, we do have a quorum.
And could I just clarify, Director Powers? I thought I heard, but I wasn't sure. Erica Sousa Llamas.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
There she is.
Yes,
Yes,
I can now.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Erica.
she's
Thank
present.
you.
Okay.
Director Powers, can you hear me as Michelle Bays?
Yes.
Okay.
It
I
might
can't
be
get my
present.
Okay. I can't get my video to work now, but I got the sound working. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Director Powers. We're going to go ahead and open our first session of public comment. This is agenda item number 2. There'll be 2 periods of public comment, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end. Members of the public have 2 options for submitting public comment. First, they may do so in writing by emailing the Department of Sentencing Policy at sentencingpolicy@N as in Nevada, D as in department, sp.nv.gov. Public comment received in writing will be provided to the commission and all of our membership for reference in the minutes of the meeting as well. Members of the public who wish to testify may do so by telephone. Due to time constraints, public comment is limited to 2 minutes. Any member of the public that exceeds the 2 minutes may submit your comments in writing thereafter as well. And please don't take offense if we kind of give you the Oscar music and tell you we have to wrap it up when we get to that 2-minute period. As a reminder, please keep your devices muted if you're going to testify by telephone today. At the time that you're called upon to give your comments, then you'll be instructed as to how to unmute yourself and speak with us. And I'm going to ask staff to manage and direct those who wish to testify by telephone. So I'm going to turn it over to Hunter at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, press *6 to unmute, then please slowly state and spell your first and last name. And we have no one who would like to testify for public comment.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Hunter. So we'll go ahead and close the first period of public comment, agenda item number 2. We'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is approval of our meeting minutes from the meeting of the commission from September 13th, 2024. Everybody, I believe, was provided with copies of those minutes. Are there any edits, comments, or corrections that anybody wants to make? I'm looking around and I don't see any hands. Georgia, did you see any hands coming up? I'm not real good at that all the time. Okay.
No, Chair.
All right. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve our minutes?
The Jaeger, I'll move to approve.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second that. Chair.
Thank you, Christine. Any discussion from anybody? Don't see hands or hear any. All those in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we will approve our meeting minutes. And Director Zarenda, I know you have to get out of here pretty quickly this morning, so whenever you need to take off, obviously go ahead. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you all and good morning. Yeah, and sorry about that. I got a last minute call literally a half hour ago saying I got to be at court today at 11:30 over in Las Vegas. So
Well,
I'm going to do
you gotta
what I
love
can.
attorneys, right?
So anyway, what I wanted to go over, because there was a lot of public cry about it, uncertainties of why this was done. But what I wanted to go over, Ely State Prison was the highest maximum security prison in Nevada. Recently, as of September 8th, I changed the population there to be a lower level medium with mostly all protective housing. And there was a reason behind all this. And I couldn't let the public know. I didn't even let staff know this was happening prior to the move, because we had some very, very high level, high security offenders that were in there that had cartel involvement and terrorist involvement. And it really involved some very high level moves, especially moving all of death row out of Ely, moving them to Indian Springs at our high desert state prison, and almost swapping the population. This was nothing new. I went back as far as 1996 and saw the minutes where Robert Baer, who was the director of corrections back in 96, discussing this move and why Ely is not the optimum place to have this level of high security. And we had an incident that happened in August where we had three offenders that were murdered. It all took place in 20 seconds. And it wasn't the actual homicide that was the issue on my end. It was the after fact, the amount of staff that we didn't have for response. Majority of the staff, except for about 14, were on 16 hours already at the time of the incident. So when you talk about a place like Ely, where it's very difficult for anyone to get a state to get employees, full-time employees to work out there, our numbers are drastically reduced. Ely and Lovelock are our two facilities out in the rural areas where we are. This time last year, we were at 39% vacancy in Lovelock and 42% vacancy of correction officers at Ely, which is very scary to run an operation like that. So when you have an incident like this, the aftermath is really what is really a serious response that you need additional staff. Having a county out there, White Pine, that has very limited staff as well. Emergency response to the facility is very limited. At the time of the incident, of the three, besides the three that died in the incident, we had 8 that had to be life flown out of Ely, which means I had to have 2 to 3 officers, depending on the security level, to transport them and to stay with them at the outside hospital. When you already had people on 16 with emergency response to move offenders around, to do investigation of the incident, to search, we had nothing. Very scary situation that we were in. We had to order 50 employees split between Las Vegas and Carson City to go to Ely for emergency response that day. Minimally to gather and move was about 6 hours after the incident, to relieve staff, to sit in the hospitals, and to assist with shakedowns and security moves. So it really was what exacerbated the transfer thoughts that I needed to do. When you also talk about maximum to highest level security, it requires more staff. So here we have a facility that has the least amount of staff, the most amount of vacancies, and requires the most amount of staff to operate safely. It's not optimal. So moving the population around has its pros and cons. And how do you get that high of level security with those that have these highest level of criminal connections from around the world safely through the community? I had to have meetings set up with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Air Force to talk about utilizing the Department of Justice 737s to fly into Ely, to fly out the 250 of the highest security offenders to Indian Springs. And with that, getting approval to land at the Air Force Base Creech that is in Indian Springs, right next to the facility. Doing that was a struggle in itself, involving, we had to involve the U.S. Senator Castro Cortez. Having the involvement in that and trying to set these meetings up was not an easy function. Finally, to get the approval to move those through a place like Ely Airport, which is pretty much right down the street from the prison, getting a 737 that large of an aircraft in and that large of an aircraft out, and how we would move those offenders. In order to move them safely, we had to also involve the U.S. Marshal Service for assistance, Las Vegas Metro, their SWAT teams and their jail to help with the assistance in getting offenders off the aircraft. We had in White Pine County and the Marshals up north in the Department of Public Safety to get the offenders on the aircraft safely. Also, because we involved the U.S. Air Force, I had to get the special forces from the U.S. Air Force also involved once we landed in Creech to get the movement going. It was very successful. I did get a lot of public resistance on it when it was happening, that, what is happening? Why is it happening? The residents near Indian Springs complaining about, nobody was told about this. We really didn't have a choice. If we told the public and they were telling their entities, and if the word got around, it could be a very, very serious security matter transporting that high level of facility. And all in all, we had to transfer 2,200 offenders all in 1 week, back and forth from the facilities, 250 by aircraft, and the rest were by buses. We obviously couldn't manage the bus process alone with corrections, so we hired some company out of Tennessee called Transcor. Transcor provide all the high security buses. They do all the security runs for ICE, moving people around the country. So we utilized them to assist us with moving the rest of the almost 2,000 offenders back and forth in 1 week. And with that, the other reason is down in Las Vegas area, which covers Indian Springs, we are pretty much full, or were full until we moved the offenders down there on our staffing. We went from about 26% vacancy this time last year of correction officers down in the Las Vegas area to less than 5% now. We actually, before the move, we stopped hiring because we actually had too many. We pretty much have about at all times right now, about 5,000 applications for corrections in the South to join the department. So having more staff available, more facilities in the area, more resources, more staff response from either the Air Force or Las Vegas or Clark County Sheriff's Office, having that response makes more sense of having this higher level of security in that area in case there's any problems or long-term issues that come up in the facility where we need local law enforcement. Ely was not the location. The other thing, if you look on a security end of Ely's security really doesn't match the standards of ACA, American Corrections Association, on perimeter security. The fences are too short. There's not enough razor wire. It doesn't, if we were ever audited by the ACA for a maximum security like that, it would never pass. Why the agency continued to keep that high of level up there, I'm not sure why, or to do these changes. Now it's more appropriate because we have what's called our protective housing. Some people call it protective custody, are up in Ely. Ely was designed originally designed for 2 offenders per cell. The facility always kept it at 1 to keep the numbers down, and also to single cell those that are the highest level security, so they don't have internal fights in the cells and having issues. Kept it at a single cell, which is why we were able to double the population up there today. Currently today, we have 1,200 up in Ely. All the, like I said, the lower level mediums. You very rarely in the prison system have any issues with those that are that level. At least not the gang issues or the problem issues with the fights or assaults. So it's a big change for Ely. And what helps me out also is when you have only one facility that had that high a level offenders, you have to put them in there no matter what the medical issues or future medical issues they have. So having such high level medical issues at a facility like Ely that has very few staff and very few medical, even less medical staff, we relied on outside hospitals all the time. Well, that becomes more expensive. And when you're talking about a level of hospital care, Ely Hospital is not the type of triage that can actually manage the emergencies that we have at the facility, whether it's a stabbing, serious assault, head injuries. So those offenders of that category medical have to be life flown to Las Vegas. The expense of that is almost obscene. It's usually about between $38,000 and $40,000 per offender to transport to the hospital in Las Vegas, which happens consistently. So just in the airport that we utilize for aircraft out of Ely actually comes from Salt Lake City, which also brings up the cost levels. It's not effective cost management. It's not effective for treatment of any offender. It's not right. Now with having that type of population, I could control who has significant medical or mental health issues, and I can relocate them. They do not have to stay at Ely. So it actually, on a fiscal reason, actually helps me manage the cost levels and future costs of medical and mental health care, but also doing the right thing to get the real appropriate medical and mental health care by putting them in a different facility that can actually manage and take care of those offenders appropriately. I do expect a reduction in long-term lawsuits. Because our major lawsuit now is over medical and mental health care. I do believe we'll start seeing reductions in that, which is also a good thing for the state because now I can manage those levels. And it was not being effective having those high level medical mental health at a facility where we have the least amount of medical and mental health care. So a lot of this makes sense. The negatives to all this, having that lower level medium of protective housing is programming. Very difficult to get programming up to a place like Ely where we can start working on true reentry back into the community to make sure that those offenders going into our communities have the tools available to make them successful so we could reduce victims in the community. So our big goal right now is how we can introduce master and major programming to Ely. We will be presenting in front of IFC in December for money that's coming over from SCAP funds. SCAP funds, so people don't understand it, it's federal funds that they give the state for tracking immigrants and illegal aliens in the state. It's SCAAP. Those funds come into the state and I can request use of those funds for things like this, which is programming, which I think is going to be a big deal. Getting those programs into Ely is going to be important, especially when you have these lower levels that are going to be getting out soon. I need to make sure that they're well prepared to get back into the community and making sure all of us are safe. So that's going to be our biggest struggle. In January, we also are implementing tablets to the offenders statewide. Every offender, starting the layout of it is starting in January 4th. Laying out tablets for every offender, and finding and getting the resources for online programming, online education, online resources for those offenders, like at Ely, that will be able to get these programs and education in place before they can go home. So our goal right now is really to increase the programs at Ely. When you talk about security at High Desert, where all those offenders went, the perimeters are actually higher level standards in High Desert than they are in ACA. The facility in High Desert actually has is the only states right now, the only state's lethal fence that surrounds the facility. It's 6 miles of 80,000 volt fence that goes around the entire facility. It's the only facility that has that. So for safety in the community, it's actually more safe being at High Desert than it is at Ely if you do have potentials. So the security concerns on putting that high level at High Desert should actually be less of a concern than it should have been up at Ely. When you look at myself as looking at professional end of this with safety and security. So the staffing, like I said, is more staff available at High Desert. We increased the actual staffing levels when we moved those offenders down there. I moved 65 full-time employee positions from Ely down to High Desert so that we can increase the security of the staffing in those areas and the safety. And we're able to now get less offenders out, get them out longer of their cells, but less amount at a time with more staff supervising, which is a lot safer. So I just thought it was important that the members of this committee understood why the move was done and the implications of it. And to truly, my background and expertise in corrections to say that the state is actually safer now. Staff are safer, the offenders are safer. This move was long time coming and should have happened many years ago. Just it really opened up my eyes and the public eyes to say that this incident that happened up there, thank God it wasn't longer than 20 seconds, but it was something that could have been a bigger disaster than it was, and more lives at stake. And I truly believe we won't see that type of incident again, at least not at that magnitude, and think we are all safer at this time. But that's all I got, and I don't know if anyone had questions, because I know a lot, even the legislatures were probably getting calls from constituents on, you know, what is happening? Why is this happening? I saw some of the articles in the paper. I saw the union saying we're jeopardizing staff at High Desert. It's the opposite. But anyway, I'm open to some questions and answers if anyone has them, just so we can open it up to make sure that people understand the implications of all this in the long term for this.
All right. Thank you, Director Zarenda. And I apologize here, but I should have told you we were jumping to agenda item number 5 and jumping over Director Powers' report so that we could get the Director Zarenda on his way. I know Julia has her hand up. Julia, you want to go ahead?
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Julia Murray, for the record. Thank you for coming in and giving this presentation this morning, Director Zarenda. I was one of the ones that asked to have you here to hear what's going on, and you actually touched on a number of items that hadn't even really entered my mind when I asked to have you come in. So I found this to be very useful. You touched on something, so I want to ask you a question about that, but then I had an additional question coming into today that had nothing to do with the safety security aspect, but rather the cost aspect. My question regarding the transfer of the low-level mediums up to Ely, you mentioned the programming issue, and that was a concern of mine, given that some of the most proactive reentry work that we are able to do is with those that are the low and low medium types. So I understand what you're saying, that it's being impacted. I expected that. That makes sense. I hear you that there's a plan in place. Does this plan take effect like now? Or are we talking about a plan that we're going to be waiting, 2 cycles of low-level medium inmates before we're even hitting the ground and seeing what's happening there? And then as a second, does this affect any of the current camp programs or just what we consider to be day-to-day programming, access to education, life skills, reentry, and that sort of thing? And then I'll ask you my other one separate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I don't know the true details what happened to this programming money because I'm not really up to speed in some of the LCB and the state legislature and the GFO office rules on the money, but we went in front of April IFC and asked for $3.2 million for programming that was really designed for the rural areas, Lovelock and Ely. We got approved through the legislature to have it. When we started to put out the RFP to get these companies in that can provide the resources, the staffing, all that for program, found out that our money was reverted back to general fund. This was about 45 days after we got it. When you do RFPs, it takes a lot longer than 45 days for it to go back. So what we ended up doing is we had to resubmit it into December's IFC. I don't think there's going to be a problem. I assume it's just a matter of kind of technicalities to get the money moved back to us from the general fund, but I'm not 100% sure. I was told that the money had to be used before the end of the fiscal year. So when we finally got the money, it was already the end of the fiscal year and I lost the program money. So that coming back, I assume will happen. Our RFP for the programming of those 2 facilities is ready to go out. So as soon as that money transfer gets approved and happens, we'll have that RFP go out. And I already have 2 companies I know of that were interested in it that asked us what happened to the money. So I know I'm going to have some interest in people and companies going out there to do the programming. Big part of this, which is also going to help your area, is those tablets that are coming in. Those tablets, they're endless on things that we can do with them, especially with programming, access to courts. It's going to have, every single tablet's going to have its own LexisNexis court library on them. It's also going to have access to what Pell Grants, which are college courses that they can actually utilize. And it also has a function on there that we could do private video with attorneys, long distance, which I think is going to be a big deal. Also, we can't do electronic signatures, but we could do electronic transfers of court paperwork. I think this is a big deal for the offenders, attorneys that are out there, even for the courts. So it saves a lot of trips. It's also going to have access to the video visiting with the families and with community services. There is a way, just so you'll understand, working in the public defender's office, we do have a way of non-recording and a way of recording. So when we hook it up, it'll be no different than phones, but it'll be by video. And another avenue it's going to be able to do is calls. They can make calls out of these tablets. It's not work like a regular cell phone. They're actually a network that does no different than the phone itself that's on a wall, goes to a PBX room. We allow the calls that we want to go out. So, but they will be able to make calls while they're in their actual cells from 7 in the morning to 11 at night. And that could also be for attorneys. So that should have better attorney access. It should have better support access to community programs that the offenders are trying to get into, and even job access and all that. We are going to have connections to the Department of Labor to connect jobs for the offenders right from their cells for setting all that up. So it's going to be a game changer, but I think the courts and the attorneys are going to see a huge change in the way they could communicate to their clients and to those that are having pending court cases, that I think is going to be something that's going to be not only saving money for their attorneys, but also saving money for the courts and for myself and for transportation. So I don't have to move offenders in and out of the community and through the community to other locations or to the courthouses. And there's a safety aspect that I think is going to be enormous out of this as well.
Thank you for your answer. And I think it just got overlooked because my question was super long. Were any of the camps impacted as well by
So
this?
none.
Okay.
And actually, Ely Conservation Camp was closed before I started in January of 23. And it did not. And just so we know, we are looking at in our budget build to be closing Wells Camp. That's the only camp that you may see next year that'll have a difference in a change after July. Wells Camp has it's difficult to get staff, it's difficult to get programs up in that area, but also the infrastructure of that facility has been neglected for so long, it's going to cost too much money to upkeep it. New roof, new boilers, new generators that are all ready to be done. It wouldn't be cost effective for the state to do that. When we talked about in the past that AB 236, and I know it's hard for us to be able to determine the real impact of it and whether or not there's other factors that are involved and not just AB 236, but it's our numbers of our minimum populations that can actually fill those camps have decreased over 2/3. When I left the state first back in 2019, we had over 1,400 offenders that qualified for camps that were used as the NDF firefighting camps. Today, we have less than 300. I think there's like 240. And that's not because we're not putting them there. That's all that qualify for it. So those effects of some of the law structures and things that we did in the Sentencing Commission affected those lower levels, which means our higher levels are actually more. Now we have our population, which is good for this too. I don't know if Georgia has it in some of her statistics, but when I first started here in January of 23, our population was at 9,963. Today, when I looked at our count, and then now we're only talking a little over 18 months later, our population is 10,564. So when you look at those numbers going up and the projections that even next year we may be over 11,000, we're running out of high security room and beds. So another thing we're going to be asking in our budget build is also to reopen the Warm Springs Correctional Center in Carson City because we are going to need the bed space. So we saw those, and a lot of it, I mean, COVID affected it, the changes in the laws affected it, changes in sentencing structure. Our population went from 12,000 to below 10. Now it's shooting back up again. So we're in a cycle, and it's a national cycle too, not just us of the numbers, because our population of residents increased, a whole bunch of things, but the numbers are going up in the state population prison system.
Yes, I very much agree with that. So thank you. My second question is far more AB 236 money oriented. As you know, one of the big numbers we're constantly looking at is the cost avoided. And the big number that has been utilized often when we're looking at avoidance is new prison rebuild, new facilities and things of that nature, given population change. So we don't always get very straightforward breakdowns when we're entering into those discussions. And so we do a whole lot of, well, maybe the cost is a static cost that's coming from this, or maybe there's an increase in cost because of an increase in wages and general staffing issues or things of that nature. We do a lot of what ifs around here.
Yeah.
I anticipate that your numbers coming out of this transfer are going to have some spikes in them on your cost side that relate to this transport, this full facilities transfer back and forth. And in anticipation of having those numbers be called anti-progress numbers or costs associated with something other than a move, I would very much appreciate if that cost could get submitted to the Department of Sentencing Policy so that we have it ready when we start looking at cost avoided versus cost spent and the impacts
Sure.
of AB 236 as we get to our financial reporting reports. And in that number, among other things that I'm certain you'll note to be relevant, I was thinking about the actual transfer of the human beings itself, all of those travel costs, things of that nature, but also building modifications that need to be made at both facilities as a result of the transfer. Obviously, death row is a very simple example. Converting the death row space at Ely into something that allows for more housing of other individuals. I've been up there. I know how limited the number of people is that you can hold in there in its current format. And I'm sure you have plans for that to expand its usage.
Yeah.
Likewise, in High Desert, there's not something that's completely comparable. So whatever you had to do to get that ready, all of those kinds of costs kind of top to bottom so that we can put the real numbers to the real costs and
Yeah.
have better discussions.
So what I think is important to explain, first of all, I'll do a real quick one is the next Board of Examiners meeting, which I think is December. You'll see the contract costs, the exact contract costs of what cost the move from Ely to High Desert and High Desert to Ely. And I believe the entire contract cost with TransCore, with Las Vegas Metro, with Department of Justice came out to about $750,000. That was the actual move of those 2,200 of what the cost was. When you talk about AB 236, why it's so difficult to say, when you reduce the population, does that save money? Well, here's what's difficult to explain. Just because the population numbers go down doesn't mean that it's less costly. If we reduce our minimum securities, which really does not cost that much, we could house 250 offenders with 2 officers. Though eliminating 2 officers because we close those is a lot less expensive than when you talk about filling them with higher security. Our higher security numbers are going up, which means those 250 probably cost about 8 officers to operate at a higher level. So it actually costs more. Population numbers went down, but our costs could go up. That's one area. What's hard to tell with COVID, the agency at the time was struggling with getting staff. They had the overall vacancy rate was over 30%. What they ended up doing to make things that they thought would be a safer option is they closed certain posts down throughout the state that they didn't think was directly involved with the actual security of the housing units. So they closed down towers, they closed perimeters, they closed, instead of having 2 officers for the 250, they would have 1. They reduced it to a level that was dangerous, below minimum staffing, and pretty much held their breath to say, hopefully we won't have any problems or any escapes. Well, they did have an escape, and that escape that happened in 22 was pretty much directly related around the staffing levels at that location. So when you look at staffing levels, and this is what I have to be able to explain to the legislature, because I know they're going to ask this. When you're working at a certain level below minimum security or below minimum staffing, and you get additional staff in, those staff are now going to be put into positions where they were not filling. So I'm going to be filling those posts that we didn't have in effect, that they reduced, because I know it's important for the security, like some of those perimeter posts, the additional officers in the unit. However, our costs went up. It didn't go down. You would think if we hired X amount of correction officers, the overtime costs would go down. However, it will go up right away because you're filling posts that weren't filled. So now I'm having the correct amount of officers working in the housing units, which weren't there. Now I'm having the perimeter posts reestablished. All these areas for safety and security, our actual costs went up, not down, even though we hired more, and you would think it would reduce overtime. But now when you fill these other posts, when they're out or out sick or hurt, you fill those with overtime. So our overtime could actually go up when we have more staff. Then there's a point when we're at a hiring piece like down in Las Vegas where we're not hiring anymore. That's when you can actually see what the real cost is and what the overtime cost is and be able to control it. So there's going to be a spike going up when we hired staff, and everyone's going to ask, well, if you hired more people, it would have reduced overtime and you would have saved money. It's not the cost. It's not it. So those played a factor. When we're talking about costs, my most expensive cost at Ely was that medical piece. And that's what's going to be important on my end to be able to show the legislature the cost savings of all this for medical issues. And like I said, when we can't fill even medical positions there, I got a part-time doctor for the facility. If I can't fill those with high-level medical professionals, well, then I could reduce the amount of medical needs and move those offenders somewhere else. So all in all, it's going to be important from that date of September 8th and on to really see what our cost was, what the savings was, and that's to be seen. And I think it's going to be pretty big. At least in the medical piece, it's going to be pretty huge. And the overtime will go down at a place like Ely because they're not going to need that many staff. Just training is a concern of mine, and we got to make sure that the staff are adequately trained in both locations. Ely has never had a population where they have so much programming and out of cell time and group time. Retraining has to happen, and it is happening, for those staff to really understand how to operate a facility like that. Now, you go down to high desert, they've never had large numbers of death row and those populations. They have to restart focusing, which we did. Trained every new staff on escorts, training with types of restraints. Even the type of restraints change at that facility, so we have to teach them that. But we're keeping track. We've had some incidents down at high desert, which when you move all the most dangerous, most violent, and those that have a history of violence to one location, you probably will get some incidents happening that they didn't have before, but it's not a lot. Ely has not had, I think, anything happen up there, which is great for them, give them a break. But we're monitoring both the incident rates, training, costs of mental health care, and also the adequacy of expenses, which I think is going to be important down the road to be able to show that, because I know the legislature is going to ask me anyway.
Well, thank you for answering my questions. I know a lot of other people have things to say, but thanks for being here today.
1 second, Dr. Lanterman, but I'll get to you. I saw your hand up. Director Zarenda, you got a number of judges and attorneys here who appreciate people who make it to court on time. So please tell me when you need to leave to get to court on time.
Yeah, no, I have to be there for 11:30. So
okay.
I didn't wear a suit today, and then they told me I got to be at court, so I got to run home first, get a suit on, and get to the courthouse.
Okay, but you're still good to answer a few more questions.
Yeah, no, I am. I got time.
Okay, just let me know when you need to go.
I will.
Dr. Lanterman?
Thank you. This is Jennifer Lanterman for the record. So I appreciate your explanation, Director Zarenda, and Ms. Murray's follow-on questions. I just wanted to remind the commission that we previously talked about some of these issues related to costs avoided, and how cost reduction is not always the appropriate metric that we need to be focusing on, especially in the short term, and particularly in a state like Nevada, where the Department of Corrections has a lot of historic deficiencies in terms of the age of its infrastructure, becoming compliant with changing regulations, the changing needs, and increase in the size of the population, combined with our disproportionately high incarceration rate relative to the national average. So one of the conversations we previously had was, if you want to reduce a prison population, you want to decarcerate, you've got to do that in one of two ways. You either reduce by risk of recidivism, which means you're going to take the people out who are the lowest risk of reoffending. Well, those are the people who have the most severe offenses of conviction. Those are typically your homicides, your very serious aggravated assaults, things like that. Or you reduce based on, severity of crime. So people who commit nonviolent drug and property offenses would be the people you release, But what that means is you keep people who are higher security with more severe offenses of conviction in Department of Corrections custody. That will, by definition, increase your costs over a period of time until you get the entire system compliant with both the law and American Correctional Association and National Commission on Correctional Health Care Standards. So that's sort of where we are now. So what we're seeing is, because there are some fluctuations in our Department of Corrections population, but what we're starting to see when you look at some of the numbers in the handout that came for today, we're starting to see some of those numbers shake out, where you're seeing kind of a reduction in people who are serving periods of incarceration for these nonviolent offenses, and an increasing proportion of your Department of Corrections population that are in there for very serious felonies, violent crimes. So those are people that are going to require those increase in infrastructure costs to ensure proper security, but also increase staffing, different staffing policies, but also they're going to be in prison for longer periods of time. So what you're going to have then at that point is you're going to have people who have chronic health issues, and you're going to then begin to observe the increased costs associated with aging prison populations, which is something we've previously discussed, because they will be in prison for longer periods of time by virtue of their convictions. So while I think it's important for us to continue to monitor costs, and it is certainly very useful to have disaggregated sort of cost recording, so we can see what those costs have been, or those additional monies have been allocated to. It should not be a surprise to us that while we are seeing this fluctuation in our Department of Corrections population, and it's increasingly people who are serving periods of conviction for very serious felony, or periods of incarceration for very serious felonies and violent crimes, that we are going to see an uptick in costs for a period of time. Some of those costs will level off after a period of time, and some of them will continue at a higher level and potentially increase if we're going to continue to maintain a population of people who are going to age in prison, right? So I just want to sort of keep front of mind for the commission members that that increase in costs in of itself is not necessarily something to be afraid of. It could simply be a function of both our population, but also the Department of Corrections move to ensuring that we are compliant with law and all the standards from ACA and NCCHC. Thank you.
Vice Chair Brady has her hand up, Chair.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Senator Krasner. Senator Krasner, I think you're still muted now. There you go.
Thank you, Chair Herndon, and thank you, Director Zorinda, for being here today. My question is in regard to community safety. The people of Nevada are concerned about safety. And I'm just wondering, with these cell phones and tablets in the prisons, how are you ensuring that these prisoners are not looking at their phone or their tablet and finding the witness that testified against them, or the victim that they attempted to murder but survived? How are the people being safe? How are you ensuring that these criminals aren't contacting their fellow gang members on the outside and putting out a hit? Thank you.
Yeah. So these tablets are not, and phones are not our tablets and phones we use in the community. And I think I mentioned in the legislation that Nevada and North Dakota are the only two states in the country now that don't do this. They're in the prison systems all over the country. Nevada is going to be one of the last states to go with them. Like I said, with the tablets, they're not used like a tablet or a phone. They go to a PBX area and we control what goes on them and what's off. It's not a direct line out. It's not internet access. It won't allow them to do what we can do on a cell phone or a tablet in the community. So we are authorized what goes out of those tablets. Nothing comes into those tablets unless it's through a closed system, and we could do that with school, certain education classes and programming. but we allow what goes in and what's out. And we've always been doing this, just not in a statewide every area. We have like Clark County School District already uses these Chrome tablets that are in our classes already in our prison system. And it only allows what we want in or what's out. It's not an internet access. So they used a closed network, goes to what we call a PBX room that allows us to say, okay, we'll allow this in, we won't allow that in. We allow this out, we won't allow that out, and it does not allow it. So if you speak with any of these other states that have them, I mean, just right around us, California has 88,000 tablets distributed all throughout the state. They have not had one security breach. When the first generation of tablets came out over 15 years ago that went into the prison systems, California was one of the first, and they did. They found a way to do hotspots from dropping cell phones in close locations, but that was all taken out because it was a flaw that the system had 15 years ago with how they can control the closed internet, or not internet, but closed system networking, which doesn't happen anymore. And that's what I use other states for. I've been on the phone this week with Arizona, Ohio, Connecticut, California, and Tennessee, talking about the tablets, what they've had experienced in them. It's all positive. In South Carolina, I mentioned also in legislation that they had a reduction in 36% of violence in the facilities, because now it's a tool that they can use to take things away. They can slowly put things on. They got gaming, things that will keep people occupied and that the offenders like. When you give these offenders something that's worth something to them, it's something that we could take away from them that they don't want taken away. So it's things that we could use as tools for us to control behaviors and to keep people occupied and to get the correct programming. But rest assured, you could speak with these other states if you have connections with these other states that already do it, and it doesn't happen anywhere else. There is no way for someone to get direct out to call somebody. It has to go through us to allow it. So even if there's phone calls that we get of people on protective orders, we could block out those phone calls so nobody in the state could actually call any of those numbers. And what's different too is the tablets will also allow us to do recordings, permanent recordings, which we don't do now on like visits. Visits, we don't record anything. We're allowed to do long distance visits with the video, even with another country. But we'll keep those visits, and we have those for intelligence and also for in case there's any criminal activity that might be spotted. So these are actually increase in security in our facilities and the community by offering the tablets, not the other way around, if that helps.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have any questions for Director Zarenda?
Vice Chair Brady has her
Okay.
hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you, CJ Brady, for the record. Thanks, Chair. As to Senator Krasner's question, the other thing I want to highlight for that is where Director Zarenda mentioned the ratio and the level of staffing. Right now, from a prosecutorial standpoint, when you have a lower CO ratio, the cell phones can get snuck in more easily. And so at the AG's office, we get a lot of referrals for cell phone cases. And sometimes the judges criticize us like, I've got a murder to worry about. Why are you bringing me this piddly cell phone case? But it's for the exact reason that you talked about, is people are using these cell phones to communicate, to traffic, to do different things. And when you have a lower CO ratio, the control over the cell phones that get snuck in is not as good. If you would agree with me, Director Zarenda, on that.
Yes, and just so everybody knows, back in March, I testified in Congress in Washington for Correctional Leaders Association on drones. And the amount of drone issues that are happening across the country, dropping cell phones into facility areas where staff aren't normally searching, or areas where staff are getting lackadaisical or don't have enough staff to cover those areas. A lot of the cell phone are being dropped by drones, but also drugs, weapons, And it's only a matter of time that you start seeing in some of these facilities around the country. It could be bombs. I mean, these cell phones are very sophisticated now and carry heavier loads than they have before. So it's a very serious issue in the prison system around the country, these drone drops. And they've also had testifies of hits that have happened from the cell phone drops, contacting cartels and gangs out in the community from these cell phones that aren't tracked. We also did a testimony in Congress for jamming devices for the facilities. These are federal laws that we don't have now in place that can protect us from jamming. But also they're not no-fly zones over prisons as of right now. So these whole things affect our communities, which I hope that we can all help to support, eliminating all jails and prisons from allowing drones. They should all be no-fly zones for jails and prisons around the country, because it's going to be that serious in some cases and it'll be too late. And also the jamming devices for prisons and jails around the country should be something that we should be focusing on, so that they cannot use those for public safety issues.
But the main question I had for you, Director Zorinda, is you mentioned for Ely that you had a lack of being able to get state law enforcement to respond to the recent murder that occurred there. So my question to you is that, were you then having to rely upon the local sheriff's office there in White Pine? And how many sheriff's deputies do you have? And was that a challenge in terms of being able to hold the offenders accountable for those murders? Do you, was it a challenge? Is that part a challenge, getting investigators out there to collect the evidence, et cetera? Was that also a challenge?
Extremely. And we only got 2 White Pine County deputies, just 2. So that is a concern of response time and investigation time. We had to send our own investigators up. The only fortunate thing of this incident, it was all caught on video. So it was very easy to determine who did what and prosecuting and doing charges on it. And we did charge 4 offenders, or were prosecuted for, or going through the process for homicide. But we didn't have any emergency response. And when we called White Pine County, it was very slow to respond because they didn't have people. The closest highway patrol officer was up in Wells at the time. So we didn't have any public safety response as well. So it was really just us trying to survive on our own out there. And it's not a situation I want to be in again with that high level population.
Anybody else have any questions? I have a quick one if I could, and I'm going to involve Judge Yeager in this as well, to maybe both of you talk something about it. But since we've obviously moved a larger population of inmates up to Ely that were closer to Southern Nevada in terms of court appearances, I'm curious as to whether the remote appearance capabilities we have at Ely, that I know were kind of in a fledgling state back when I left the district court, but we were starting to utilize it. Is that going to impact the ability of people to make those remote appearances, or is it robust enough to accommodate the larger population?
So, yeah, so our numbers of actual appearances in court aren't that high. When we get enough notice, and like I said, having this type of population, I can move them anywhere. Right? It's not a big deal with us moving them to Las Vegas area or back to high desert or southern desert for court appearances. Where it's going to help is when we get these tablets to be able to do the attorney pieces, and if there's any negotiations or settlements before court, we can actually do them on remote very simply now, or will be starting in January. But court appearances won't change. We'll still be able to get people to court because we can move this type of offender pretty much anywhere.
Well, but I'm not worried about necessarily physically having to transport them to court, but eliminating that when possible, because a lot of times attorneys may not need the clients to come to court physically, and they may not want to come to court physically, but they might just want to appear by video. And I didn't know if that was going to be impacted by having more people on a daily basis that might need that than before. And I don't know, Beta, if you all are having any problems with that or if it's working well.
So we haven't had anyone appear via video on any of our prisoner cases, but I can see, like, for example, if someone's got two cases, they get revoked on probation on one, they go up to the prison, it's a stipulated sentence on the other one. There's not really a need to bring them all the way down to the courtroom because, you know, there's not really a whole lot to discuss because it's a stipulated sentence, and that would potentially help the prison. So I can see how using more Zoom appearances could be beneficial.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? All right, looks like you're all good, Director.
Hey, thank you.
Go put your suit on and
Yeah.
enjoy your day in court. Take a
Yeah,
break.
thank you, everybody. I appreciate
All
you
right.
letting me speak.
Thank you very much. All right, we will go ahead and close agenda item number 5, and then we're going to move back to agenda item number 4, which is our report from Director Powers, who is statutorily mandated to update the commission on sentencing and related issues regarding the functions of the department. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Powers.
Thank you, Chair. Going to. All right. So we are going to go over interesting things about the department regarding our core functions. We'll start with administrative. We are going to BOE in November and IFC in December for the SB 103 Management Analyst 2 position. If you'll remember, that was put into contingency last legislative session regarding the misdemeanor study, and it was giving us another position to help with data. So hopefully that will go through. We'll keep you updated on that. Regarding budgeting, agency request budgets are now public, and we are just waiting for January to have the governor approved. In data and reports, we will talk about murder first. Commissioner Jackson was able to talk to the DA's Association. We were able to get their questions and any problems they were having with the way we were collecting data, the way it's been collected in the past. I will talk about Clark County. We were able to speak with the DA's office there, and we do have corrected information from them. The one originally reported notice of intent to seek the death penalty for Clark County was correct. However, that same defendant had 2 cases that qualified with separate notices, so that brought the total up to 2. And there were also 5 additional filed notice of intents in 2023. 4 were reported by the Clark County DA's office originally, but with no marked for the notice. So we did know about them, just not about the notice of intent to seek the death penalty. 1 other defendant was not reported by Clark at all. And 1 defendant who was not reported had a notice of reservation to seek the death penalty filed in 2023. And the actual intent to seek was not filed until 2024. This brings the total number of defendants for Clark County with reported notice of intents to seek the death penalty to 6. Excuse me. And then with an overall total of 7 cases for 2023. They have been very helpful with giving us the corrected information, and they are getting a new system at this time. And so we should get better data next year. We are hoping that we'll be able to work with all the DAs in all the counties to update the way we are collecting information. Our data team has put together an electronic version, and we are testing that out with Clark County first. So that is the update for murders. In data and reports, we have been talking about youthful offenders, and you will see that later in this meeting, and you will have a presentation for that. We will move on to outreach. We are still meeting with P&P and DOC on a monthly basis. In outreach, I was also asked to speak at the Illinois Sentencing Policy Advisory Council. It was held at the Northern Reception and Classification Center, and we then toured the classification center, and so that was a really great experience. We are gearing up for legislation to track all criminal justice bills and offer data to assist in any way possible there. We also we've been talking about the SQL database that we were trying to get, and it is now ready to start, be up and running. Jenna will talk to you about that a little bit later, but that's very exciting because we were able to work with OCIO and get that ready. Also in outreach and partly commission, I wanted to talk about the grant. You had a presentation about that last time. Right now, the total expenditures are $66,451. They were, the grant money was given out between May 24th and August 28th. The grantees needed time to ramp up for their projects. The earliest grantees now have everything online, and while the last people to be granted are still gathering and preparing to begin their programs. The expenses were from June 1st through September 30th was at $66,000. As a reminder, they were broken down as follows: 4 projects to the most teams, the mobile outreach safety teams and forensic assessment services triage teams, the FAST, 3 projects to mental health court and substance use disorders, and 3 projects for supportive services of training and employment. Most of the grant recipients gave presentations to the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council at the last 2 meetings in August and October, and those presentations can be viewed online through our website. The first quarter programmatic reports were due yesterday, October 31st, and NDSP staff has just started going through those. And that is, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Commission. We wanted to talk about meeting times for next year. So I've spoken with the chair, and we are going to put out a survey. The best time as far as weeks of the month would be the second full week of the month, and we will put out a survey to each of the commission members to see if there are days and times that are better for you. If you would like to bounce back and forth, have different days of the week on different months, we will put together all the answers from that survey, and then we will put together the 2025 schedule. And that is all today. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I had told Director Powers that I didn't want to disrupt anything when I first started. The dates and times were already set, but I didn't know how we arrived at that and whether that was most beneficial to everybody. It appears that it was most beneficial to Justice Stiglitz's schedule before, and I'm fine keeping them where we have them now. But if there are days of the week and or start times that are more convenient to the group collectively, then I'm happy to juggle that as well. So we'll get the survey out to everybody, and please weigh in if you would, and we'll get everything set for next year. Does anybody have any questions for Director Powers from her report? Do not see any hands. Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and close agenda item number 4 and move to agenda item number 6. Did John join us?
Chair, permission to speak?
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you know, but Assemblywoman Kosendine is going to, I think she had a hearing or another meeting she had to attend. So I wanted to let the commission know that.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Director Powers or Hunter, do we know, did John McCormick join us? I didn't see him on the screen.
He is here, Chair.
Oh, great. Okay, we'll move to the Misdemeanor Subcommittee report, and I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Chair. I just was able to join. The Misdemeanor Subcommittee is still sort of plodding along. We're still at the stage of having a work group to really kind of fundamentally look at the classification structure, to make some recommendations to the larger group to bring to the commission. We're going to be meeting again next week, and then we have a full Misdemeanor Subcommittee meeting like the 3rd week in November, I believe.
Okay, Perfect. Anybody have any questions for Mr. McCormick? Do not see any or hear any. Okay, John, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and close agenda item number 6 and then move to agenda item number 7, which is our data reports from NDSP. And I will turn it over to Ms. Bonacorsi.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen with you all really quickly. For the record, my name is Jenna Bonacorsi. Good morning, Commission. At our last meeting, we concluded our study on the Nevada Department of Corrections aging population, which was comprised of offenders 55 years and older. During that study, we were also asked to look at the young adult offender population in the Nevada Department of Corrections. This young adult population is comprised of offenders 24 years and younger. You will see that throughout this study, we have included the numbers for juvenile offenders who were sentenced as adults and admitted into the Nevada Department of Corrections. They are not housed in general population until they turn 18, when they will serve the remainder of their booking as a traditional adult offender. Minors on average over the last 7 years have made up only 0.14% of the total population and 1.53% of the young adult population. Here is a review of the total population broken down by age groups before we jump into looking at just the young adult offenders. The total Nevada Department of Corrections population has decreased by 23.44% from 2017 to 2023, dropping by 3,215 offenders. Over the last 7 years, offenders 30 to 34 have remained the largest portion of the total population at an average of 16.64%. The young adult population has decreased by a total of 39.74% from 2017 to 2023, dropping by 556 offenders. On average, over the last 7 years, offenders who are 24 years old have represented the largest portion of the young adult population at an average of 23.01%. This was followed closely by 23-year-old offenders at 21.12%. In 2023, the largest group of offenders were 23-year-olds, followed closely by 24-year-olds. Together, they represented 41.99% of the young adult population. And 18-year-old offenders made up 3.44% of the young adult population. Over the last 7 years, the largest portion of the young adult population has been comprised of violent offenders at an average of 69.64%. The offense group and the offense or the felony category are all represented by the offender's most serious offense on their entire booking. In 2017, violent offenders represented 60.97% of the population, and by 2023, it grew to represent 75.33% of the population, while the total number of violent offenders reduced by 218. There was a significant drop in the proportion and the number of property and drug offenders. Property offenders in 2017 made up 20.66% of the young adult population and 6.64% in 2023, dropping by 233 offenders. Drug offenders represented 7.59% in 2017 and 1.90% in 2023, dropping by 90 offenders. In 2017, Category B offenders represented 71.84% of the population, and by 2023, they represented 74.14% of the population, while the total number of Category B offenders reduced by 380. In 2017, Category C, D, and E offenders combined represented 22.66% of the population, and by 2023, they represented 15.30%, with a total reduction of 180 offenders. Category A grew by 12 offenders representing 5.50% in 2017 and 10.56% in 2023. From 2017 to 2023, the total population has seen a 19.64% 4% decrease in admissions, while the young adult population has seen a 49.80% decrease in admissions. For the total population, on average over the last 7 years, violent and property offenders represented the largest number of admissions at an average of 32.01 and 30.81%, respectively. For the young adult population, on average over the last 7 years, violent and property offenders represented the largest number of admissions as well, at an average of 52.81% and 23.64%, respectively. I did want to note that there was a typo on the original version of this slide that was sent out to the commission with the meeting materials. The other category had a change of +9 offenders from 2017 to 2023. An updated version of this has been posted to our website. There was a reduction in the number of admissions for property and drug offenders from 2017 to 2023 at 229 and 120 offenders, respectively. The proportion of the population represented by drug and property offenders in 2017 was 45.76% and 21.81% in 2023. One thing our department found striking about the trends in young adult admissions was the 157 offender reduction in admission for violent offenders. We expected to see the property and drug reduction due to AB 236. So in future presentations on this topic, our department plans to dive further into the actual offenses for the violent offense group. For the total population, on average over the last 7 years, category B and C offenders represented the largest number of admissions at an average of 48.22% and 26.27%, respectively. For the young adult population, on average over the last 7 years, category B and C offenders also represented the largest number of admissions at an average of 60.59% and 22.55%, respectively. Category A offenders had a negligible change in the number of admissions, but category B, C, and D all reduced in the overall number of admissions. There was little proportional change in the number of admissions when broken down by category. The most significant changes were a 5.39% proportional growth for category B and a 4.15% proportional decrease for category E. As we continue to dive into the young adult population for the Nevada Department of Corrections, I stated this before, we plan to look into the specific offenses. The format for future presentations will be very similar to what we had done with the aging population, but I did want to part of that conversation about the aging population was driven by questions from the commission. So at the end of this presentation, I'll open that up to you guys for questions that you might have or areas of research specifically in this young adult population you'd like us to look into. But for now, our general plan is to continue similar to what we did with the aging population. In the future, we plan to look into the total population with that new all offenses data set that we received and we were able to utilize in the aging populations analysis. We also have been asked to look at the female population and the trends that they have had. We plan to do a habitual offender study, which we will go into the actual individual case files for the habitual offenders and determine the underlying offenses for their habitual status. And we also have a dashboard update for you. I'm going to get that next screen ready. So for those of you who might be new to the Sentencing Commission, we have on our website a section that we call the Hub. And in the Hub, we have this Nevada Department of Corrections dashboard. We have added a new update to this dashboard. And as it loads, I want to do a big thank you to our team here. There was a lot of work put into this presentation by my staff, and I am very grateful to the work that they did behind the scenes of the coding behind this dashboard page. But these first four we've shown and presented before to the commission. But the very last one was a request that we had to be able to look at county level data. So in this dashboard, you can, it'll show the most recent month's data. So right now we have the most recent data set we've received from the Department of Corrections is September 30th data from 2024. So you can hover over each county and see, and this is based on an offender's county of commitment, so the county that they were committed by. You can filter it over here by category felony if you wanted to just, or felony category, excuse me, if you wanted to just look at category A and B offenders among the counties, or if you wanted to specifically look at an offense group, you can filter it there like you can in the prior slides as well. So this is a really interesting way to be able to compare numbers for counties right away. You will see that there is an option here for an aggregate county. These are offenders who have an aggregated sentence from multiple counties. So they're not, some offenders, when they are aggregated, all of their cases were in the same county. So we're able to just narrow it down to one county, but some offenders, they do have multiple counties on there. And so yes, this is our new dashboard. Like I said, if you have not seen our dashboards yet, I'd encourage you guys. They're a really helpful tool, especially during legislative session if you're looking for quick numbers. Otherwise, our department is always here for data pulls more specific. And last, I wanted to give an update. Georgia quickly touched on it about our sequel. We are really excited to get that up and running. We have been able to connect to it. So now we're in the process of uploading 7 years worth of data to it. So it'll be a little bit still before it's fully functioning for us to be able to use for analysis, but we're very thankful and excited to have that portion up and running. With that being said, does the commission have any questions?
Well, first off, Jenna, thank you very much for the presentation, and I love the updates to the dashboard. That is a real quick and easy way to access data that can be really important and useful to everybody. So thank you, and thank you to your staff. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Bonacorsi?
I think Dr. Bradley has her hand up.
Oh, all right, Dr. Bradley.
Thank you, Sheriff Bradley, for the record. Would it be possible to include population counts of those counties, just so that we have a sense of, you know, when it shows like 3 for Eureka, for example, the offender count, I don't know what their population is and how that compares to other counties. Is that possible to include?
Yes and no. The reason that we did not include it, because we did consider that option, is how the census works in Nevada. We only have an accurate, an official, I guess would be the way to say it, count every 10 years. And so otherwise it is done based on the projected number. And so we, in a past report, we have included the 2020 census's numbers, the most recent numbers that we had. But we've gone back and forth on providing that just due to the fact that we're not as confident in those exact numbers, since they are from the Department of Taxation's their projections for that year. So we've considered it, but we ultimately ended up deciding not to include it. But I do know that the estimates are available, so maybe we could even consider about posting a link or something that is, you guys are able to view it. I know when we presented on the NRS 178.750 report, the murder report, we did provide a table that had those most recent numbers to compare with the number of murders, so we could consider maybe utilizing some of those numbers. The only part is that the times don't match, because I don't have the actual population as of September 30th, 2024. I don't have access to that information, but it would maybe provide a ballpark.
Okay. Yeah, there's no state official census that's tracked outside of the census, I assume.
Not that I have been able to find, but we can do some more research into it and see if we can find something else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and DA Hicks.
One question I had, Jenna, in regards to the habitual offender study is, I believe you said you're going to look at what the underlying offense is I'm not sure if I heard you mention whether or not you're going to also look into the number of prior felonies that offender had, and if possible, also what those offenses were, I think would be really helpful to see as well.
Yes, I know that that is on our plan, is to look into the whole history behind for the habitual offender study. So that is on our list, but we will make sure that we include that when we come to that point of presenting it. There's going to be a lot of manual digging through, so that report might be a little bit down the road yet, but that information, some of it we have access to just in the data sets we currently have, and then some of it we have to go and manually do case file reviews. So, but I will add that to the list to make sure it's presented upon.
And just real quickly, I wanted to point out, we've talked about this before, but one of the problems with the habitual offender data that we get from DOC is it's all under other. And that's why we really want to dig into the underlying offenses, because we don't know if they were violent or if they were drugs or property. And so we really want to be able to portray an accurate picture of the habitual offender population.
Anybody else have any questions for Jenna? Okay. Thank you again, Jenna. Appreciate it. We will close agenda item number 7 and move on to agenda item number 8. We already briefly discussed the idea of future meetings, dates and times, and we'll obviously get the survey out before we finalize all the dates and times for next year. But as always, a reminder, if you have any ideas about topics you'd like to get on the agenda for any of the meetings, please reach out to myself or Director Powers and let us know. If anybody knows right now of something they'd like to see on an upcoming agenda item, as an upcoming agenda item, please raise your hand, hop in, let me know. Anybody? Yep. Vice Chair?
Thank you. I'd like to, one of the things, somebody mentioned metrics earlier today, and I'd like to see if we can start measuring metrics around what communities are doing with regard to implementing a system of like transitional housing, helping people with mental health programs. I know that when I visited Miami, they have crisis intake centers, and I'd like to, and I think that our ability as communities across Nevada to be able to provide crisis services is a big part of whether or not people are recidivate. And so is there a way that we can start identifying metrics that help us know how we're doing as a state and communities within the state to address mental health, transitional housing, that kind of thing?
Okay. Dr. Bradley.
I don't know if this is a presentation or a topic maybe it's just a topic, but I know I've asked before, and I know there's lots of challenges with this, but I wanted to check in on it. Numbers regarding local facilities, so jails, city jails, county jails. As we see numbers of offenders decrease in the prisons, I just am wondering if the jail populations are going up, or if people are spending longer in jail, or I know there's a lot of challenges with that because there's multiple jurisdictions, and data collection, I'm sure, is different. And then, of course, I always have an interest in the mental health related services or numbers, or I don't even know what's being tracked, frankly, with the different systems. So I'm not even sure that I have a intelligent specific request regarding that.
So I was going to say, I know previously we've looked at the number of people in CCDC that are on antipsychotics. I would certainly suggest we could also look at the numbers of people that are in competency as another, so since we pull all of that into one court, I can tell you that I know our competency numbers are through the roof. So those are some metrics that we could do, at least for Clark County, that I'm aware of.
Hey, Jenna, do you or have you ever reached out to any of the local municipalities with regard to their jail populations to try and kind of get an understanding of that?
We've worked, not necessarily for that specific question, but we have
Okay.
worked with Clark County Detention Center and Washoe as well with
Okay.
other requests in the past. So we could reach out to them and see if we could get more of a just general population statistics from them, from those two counties. At least that would be a good start.
Okay. Can we attempt to do it in all the counties?
Yes, the
Okay.
some of the rural counties is where we've had a little bit more challenges trying to get some of that information. But we can reach out to them. I don't know what we'll get from some of the rules, but we'll reach out.
Okay. All right, Dr. Lanterman.
And this is Jen Lanchman for the record. I'm following up on Dr. Bradley's request. I think a really important dimension of AB 236, which we've discussed before, is if we are attempting to reduce Department of Corrections population, there's a difference between reduction and displacement. Like, so we're just moving a population from prisons to jails. But prisons are funded differently than jails are funded. And so one of the challenges we have really truly assessing the function, short and long-term impacts of AB 236 is that data are also collected differently for Department of Corrections versus the jails. So it might be, I think, a worthwhile project for the Department of Sentencing Policy to see if we can develop any type of sort of monitoring system, data collection process that our jails can report into, not just with respect to population, but if they are assessing people coming in, what is the relative need for various types of programs and services versus their resources. So what is the gap between program and service need and availability of programs and services? Because that will absolutely impact public health and public safety when people leave jail and they're returning to the community versus maybe going to Department of Corrections or sort of agencies outside of the state. So I think that if we are going to work with our jails throughout the state, asking them for some data, it might be worth having a discussion with them to determine whether or not we might want to build a more sustainable data reporting process so that we can really understand what's going on throughout the state and how that might impact our recommendations to the legislature, so that we are recommending allocation of budgets that are consistent with what the states are, what the needs are throughout the states, not just in the prison, but sort of prison system, but ignoring what's going on at the jail level and how that might be translating to more local problems. We want to reduce problems. We don't want to shift them and create others. And we don't know that unless we have the data for jails.
Just real quickly, we have a plan to reach out to the jails, and because we do want to talk about that displacement, where's the money actually being spent? I kind of wanted to touch on, if we remember, justice counts, and that it was through CSG, and we talked about becoming a justice count states and being able to get data from many of the local level agencies. And that kind of fell by the wayside because there were many people who didn't want to participate, and there were questions and worries about what would happen with that data. And so that might be a discussion for one of our first 2025 meetings, is either something like justice counts or actually bringing them back on board. So just to throw that out there so we can start thinking about it.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and close agenda item number 8. We're going to move on to agenda item number 9, our second period of public comment. Before I give that spiel, Hunter, do we have anybody on the line for public comment?
We don't have anyone on the line for public comment.
All right, thank you very much. So we will close agenda item number 9. And that brings us to the end of our meeting, agenda item number 10, which is our adjournment. I appreciate, as always, everybody's time and participation today. Please, again, keep an eye out for the survey to come so we can settle on some dates and times for our meetings for next year. And with that, have a great weekend. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.